Good morning, good evening. Welcome to week 7 of PSHS 6240 here at George Washington University. Just a couple of announcements. We're having our final WebEx session this Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You will be doing the Boston Marathon intelligence failure, And there's plenty of you've got plenty of data from week 6 to kind of give you a framework. And then there's information from congressional forums that talk about the intelligence failure. So about a 20-minute presentation, 5 to 10 minutes for questions. What I'm also going to do is do a job talk at the end of that. So you're going to brief for 30 minutes, and then I'll do a 30-minute job talk. So if you're interested in careers in the intelligence community, Homeland Security, federal government, please stop by and let me know what your questions are. So come up on the WebEx at 9:30, and we can go from there. So that's for this Thursday. Paper 2, everyone has gotten it back. So just a couple of issues with it. Again, if you did really well if you were very specific. If you're talking about, say, sarin, if you talked about binary, unitary, shelf life, precursor material, all those things, and that not only just talked about it, but talked about how that either limits it or makes it more of a potential terrorist weapon. That's the detail I was looking for this paper. Again, impact of the science, whether it's ricin, whether it's plague, whether it's sarin, whatever the topic was. How the science either constrains it or allows for it. And I'm looking for you to kind of fuse the science with the threat. For example, if you want to talk about ricin, you can talk about Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and how difficult it is to produce or how easy it is. But then someone might ask, like, okay, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, can you inspire someone to do a ricin attack? How hard is it for Joe Schmo, lone wolf, to do a complex ricin or what have you attack? That's kind of, the highest grades if you kind of covered that. And then, think of the coronavirus. Right now, a year ago, no governor or state official knew things. I'm sure the terms socially distance and R rates and all those things that we've all become familiar with, I'm sure no governor was thinking about that. So he or she is asking for somebody like you to say, explain this threat to me in very simple terms so I can communicate it to a mass audience. Do I need to be worried about it? What precautions do I need to take to implement? That's kind of, when you see the communication strategy for coronavirus and state level and all those issues, think about that when you're writing this paper. So, review of week 6, intelligence and counterterrorism. And I kind of regret, I should have implemented maybe a topic about the Capitol Hill shooting, but you're welcome to do that, or the Capitol Hill incident. You're welcome to do that in your final paper if you want to. I think we've seen some data come out on it about the intelligence failure regarding that, so you can discuss that in detail. So, are we more secure since 9/11? I would argue yes. I would argue that the complex attack, and the National Geographic explains it in detail, will be very difficult to implement right now because of some of the measures that we've put in. And that's a good thing. We see these lone wolves, we see these one-off actors, and maybe it's good that terrorism is confined to that level of violence. So what do you do if bin Laden determined to attack in the U.S.? And the point of this is, if you're an intel guy like I am, and you're briefing something like this is such a vague notion that it's very difficult for a policymaker or decision maker to make a decision on this. So let's say you're briefing President Bush, and he comes back to you and says, okay, what do you want me to do? You tell me bin Laden determined to attack in the U.S. What do I do? As an intel guy, you should have some recommendations. And if I was, I'm doing this in hindsight, but if I was the briefer, I would say, and sir, ma'am, we could recommend certain procedures with airline security and the FAA to increase or harden our aircraft that doesn't have an impact on the larger traveling public. And whenever I get these nebulous reports about terrorism threatens the U.S., particularly if it's foreign terrorism, I usually shift to civil aviation. And you saw that in the BBC documentary that terrorists always return to civil aviation. Was 9/11 an intelligence failure? Arguably, no. Not all bad things that happen are intelligence failures. And you can further say we live in a free country. 19 shadowy people coming into our country. Well, we might not have open borders, but we have free borders. You can travel back and forth, and we don't want to impugn on that. So maybe it was an intelligence failure. However, again, after seeing the NSA documentary particularly and knowing that there was communication between Osama bin Laden's safe house in Yemen and known operatives in the United States, and that wasn't alerted to any of the other agencies that could do an investigation, whether it's local law enforcement, statewide law enforcement, FBI, federal agencies, that's a pretty significant intelligence failure. And then arguably again, we should have known, and you saw this in the 9/11 documentary, that Ramzi Youssef, or that a Tomahawk missile, a commercial aircraft could be used like a Tomahawk missile, as we saw in the Ramzi Youssef plot. So based on those two factors, I do think 9/11 was an intelligence failure, but you're welcome to agree or disagree. So Fort Hood shooting, and this is not just a Fort Hood shooting, this is right-wing extremism. We could talk about this. At what point should radicalization be monitored? This is a question that we don't have an answer to. And you have different answers for different questions, for different groups. If let's say I'm an ISIS supporter, and let's say I surf ISIS websites from the privacy of my home, should I be monitored for that? I mean, it's a free country. I get to do certain things. Let's say I like an ISIS website from my home, their YouTube channel or Facebook pages or what have you. Do I then go on some sort of list? What if I interact, just like Nidal Hassan did with a known terrorist? Should I be monitored then? Well, as you saw in the video, those are a dime a dozen. Hundreds of thousands of people interact with websites or interact in these chat rooms with suspected terrorists. At what point should radicalization be monitored? Then let's shift this over to the right-wing extremism issue. I regret this class again focused, or this section focused a little bit too much on ISIS and Islamic extremism, but let's shift it over to the right-wing extremism. Does anyone who wears a QAnon shirt or orders a QAnon shirt or QAnon merchandise, should they be put on a list? I mean, you're talking thousands, hundreds of thousands. You're talking about people in Congress. You're talking about other folks as well. Should they be put on a monitor list? What if somebody, again, surfs on a Oath Keepers or 3%, extremist group? What then? Do they get put on? Do they get further scrutiny? Do they get surveillance? Do we get wireless warrant tap? We don't really have good answers for these. Again, do we have appropriate funding structures and personnel to stop intelligence failures? Arguably, yes. We just don't have the people, or we don't have the competence to stop them. I'm hesitant to throw more money at a problem or more people at a problem and assume that will solve the problem. But I'll let you decide on this piece. And then, is there always going to be low-level attacks? And I'm not talking about 9/11s. I'm not talking about Capitol Hill shootings. I'm talking about the guy in El Paso who shoots up a Walmart, or the guy that shoots up the Orlando nightclub. In a country that's free, that has a pretty loose affiliation with gun control or not very restrictive gun laws, and apparently the American people want it that way, should we just accept it? Except there will always be a shooter that's deranged, that has some sort of cause. And we just kind of focus on the big pieces, the 9/11 pieces, the Capitol Hill shooting, but there's nothing we can do to get at that lower level. And again, I'll let you decide. And then intelligence versus policy, I covered this in the lecture, so I'm not going to get into more detail. So this week 7, we're going to talk about leadership targeting, drones, which was a big piece a few years ago and may come back depending on what follows ISIS. Is it just a leadership is it a strategy or just a tactic? Wonder what circumstances is it effective? And then finally, what are the conditions that have led to the Islamic radicalism U.S. have we seen since 2009, and the conditions that have led to right-wing extremism? So if there's any questions or issues, let me know, and I look forward to the discussion this week.